There are people who say yes, even when their heart whispers no. People who carry everyone's burden, but never show the weight on their own shoulders. People who smile while their boundaries collapse silently behind them, not because they are weak, but because they've lived in a world where no felt dangerous, disappointing, or unlovable. If you are one of them, the type who puts others first even when it hurts, this video will finally explain why you're wired this way and what hidden psychology lies beneath the inability to refuse. Part 1. Engaging, emotional start, 350 words. People who can't say no often live two lives. The one they show the world and the one they keep hidden. On the outside, they seem agreeable, cooperative, endlessly kind, the person everyone loves to rely on. But inside, they are constantly negotiating between what they want and what they think they must do to maintain peace. Psychologists call this behavior people-pleasing, but the truth is deeper than the word suggests. For many, this habit begins in childhood. They learned early that approval felt like safety. A smile from others meant acceptance. And conflict? Conflict felt like danger, something to be avoided at all costs. So they developed a survival strategy. Say yes, stay agreeable, keep the peace, make others happy, even at the cost of themselves. But here's the part most people don't understand. People who can't say no are not trying to be too nice. They are trying to prevent disappointment, rejection, and emotional distance. Every yes is a small attempt to stay connected with others, to avoid the fear that saying no might push someone away. This creates a strange emotional loop. The more they agree, the more people expect from them. The more people expect, the harder it becomes to refuse. And eventually, they become trapped in a pattern where their worth feels tied to their usefulness. But deep down, they're tired of giving more than they receive, tired of being the emotionally responsible one, tired of saying yes when their soul needs them to say no. And yet, they still can't stop, because the fear of letting someone down feels heavier than the burden of helping. People who can't say no often live with a constant emotional pressure that others never notice. While the world sees them as dependable, soft-hearted, and always available, they are quietly fighting a psychological battle inside themselves, a battle between their personal boundaries and the expectations placed on them. To understand this behavior, you must look at what yes really means to them. For most people, saying yes is just a simple choice. But for those who struggle with boundaries, yes feels like a form of emotional insurance. It's a way of staying needed, staying connected. Every agreement is like signing an invisible contract with someone else's happiness, even if their own happiness is slowly fading. Psychologists suggest that this pattern forms from early emotional experiences. Perhaps as a child, they grew up around parents or caregivers who became distant or upset when they disagreed. Maybe they lived in a home where no was treated as disrespect, selfishness, or disobedience. So the child learned one powerful lesson. If I refuse, I lose love. And that belief followed them into adulthood. Even now, as grown individuals, that old fear still whispers inside them. When someone asks for help, that fear wakes up. What if they get disappointed? What if they think I'm rude? What if they stop liking me? What if they feel hurt because I said no? Most people don't understand how deeply those questions cut into their mind. Saying no feels like a risk, not just a conflict, but of emotional abandonment. They aren't afraid of the task itself. They're afraid of the reaction, afraid of the shift in energy, afraid of being misunderstood. This makes them become emotional caretakers, people who take responsibility for everyone's feelings except their own. They overthink every decision. If I say no, maybe they'll be upset. If I say yes, I'll feel exhausted, but at least no one will be hurt. And so they give in, again, and again, and again. But the emotional cost is heavy. Some begin to lose their sense of identity because their life becomes shaped by other people's needs. They start to forget what they truly want. Their schedule becomes filled with commitments that don't belong to them. Their energy is drained by obligations they never chose. And slowly, they begin to feel invisible, like a background character in their own story. Inside, resentment grows quietly, not anger toward others, but anger toward themselves for allowing their boundaries to collapse. It's a silent frustration that builds every time they sacrifice their own peace for someone else's convenience. Then comes guilt. Guilt for feeling tired. Guilt for wanting space. Guilt for wishing they could just say, "No, I can't." But guilt is powerful. It keeps them stuck in the cycle. They fear the weight of hurting someone more than they fear the consequences of draining themselves. Yet here's the truth they rarely realize. People who can't say no are often some of the most emotionally intelligent, empathetic, and sensitive individuals. They care deeply, sometimes too deeply, and because of that, they treat every request like a moral responsibility. But caring is not the problem. The problem is caring more than their heart can handle. And the longer they go without boundaries, the more their mind becomes overwhelmed. They may appear calm and composed, but inside, they're always one unexpected request away from emotional exhaustion. Some even develop anxiety around messages, calls, or invitations, because every interaction feels like another opportunity to be asked for something they must say yes to. They begin to avoid people not because they dislike them, but because they fear disappointing them. They're caught between two fears, the fear of saying no and the fear of being overwhelmed. And the saddest part? Most people around them will never know how much emotional noise they carry because they hide it behind a polite smile. This is why their journey isn't about becoming more selfish. It's about learning to value themselves the same way they value others. Learning that no does not break relationships. Learning that boundaries are not walls. They are doors that protect their peace. Learning that true connections survive honesty. Because the moment they understand that their needs matter too, everything changes. Their relationships become healthier. Their mind becomes lighter. And their yes becomes genuine, no longer based on fear, but on choice. People who can't say no often don't realize how much of their life has been shaped by fear. Fear of hurting someone. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of disappointing the very people they care about. But deep inside, there is something more powerful than that fear. A quiet longing to finally breathe without feeling responsible for everyone else's emotions. This is where real psychological change begins. One day, something happens, a moment so subtle yet so heavy, it shakes their inner world. Maybe they agree to one more favor when they're exhausted. Maybe they cancel their own plans to help someone who wouldn't do the same. Maybe they realize that the people they constantly say yes to don't even notice how hard they're trying. And in that quiet moment, they finally ask themselves, why does everyone else deserve comfort except me? That single question becomes a doorway to transformation. They begin to see that always being available hasn't brought them peace. It has brought them emotional fatigue. They start noticing how much of their energy is spent fixing problems that aren't theirs. They recognize how often they stay silent just to avoid conflict. And little by little, they start to understand that their kindness has been used as a currency, traded for temporary approval. But here's the truth. Real approval comes from the people who accept you even when you say no. Real love stays with you even when you set boundaries. Real respect grows when you protect your time, your energy, and your emotional well-being. And when they finally internalize this truth, a new version of themselves begins to emerge. It doesn't happen loudly. It doesn't happen suddenly. It happens quietly, like the soft rebuilding of a heart that finally realizes it deserves rest. The first no they say feels scary. Their voice shakes. Their heart races. Their mind imagines all the worst outcomes. But when nothing terrible happens, something shifts inside them. They feel a small sense of empowerment, a feeling they haven't experienced in years. The second no feels a little easier. The third one feels like freedom. They begin to understand that they are not responsible for every emotion around them. They're not obligated to carry every weight. They're not required to solve every problem. Their worth is not determined by how much they sacrifice. For perhaps the first time, they begin choosing themselves. They start protecting their space, not as a punishment to others, but as a gift to themselves. They allow themselves to rest without guilt. They stop apologizing for things that aren't their fault. They say yes when it feels right, not when it feels safe. And slowly, they discover the version of themselves that was buried under years of pleasing others. But here's the most beautiful part of their transformation. The moment they create boundaries, Their relationships begin to change, not fall apart. The people who genuinely love them adapt. The people who only took advantage of them disappear. And suddenly, their circle becomes smaller, but more honest, more peaceful, more real. Psychologically, something incredible happens. Their anxiety decreases. Their self-respect grows. Their decisions become clearer. Their inner voice, the one they use as silence, becomes stronger. They realize that saying no doesn't make them unkind. It makes them authentic. For the first time in their life, their yes becomes real. Not forced, not fearful, not pressured. Just real. And real yes build real connections. People who couldn't say no are some of the most loving souls on this planet. Their empathy is deep. Their heart is gentle. Their loyalty is unwavering. But now their compassion includes themselves too. And when a person like this learns to value their own boundaries, they don't become colder, they become clearer. They don't lose people. They lose the wrong people. And they don't stop caring. They start caring for themselves with the same love they've always given to everyone else. In the end, their story becomes a journey not from kindness to selfishness, but from fear to freedom, from exhaustion to peace, from pleasing others to finally honoring themselves.